One of the discussions which occurs time and time again in the role-playing community is playing with miniatures. Some people don't like it, and some people do. One of the arguments given for using miniatures is, if you don't have miniatures, how do I tell if my warrior here can get across the bridge, or if a way is blocked, or if somebody will get an opportunity attack as she's crossing the bridge, or if she's so drunk she falls off it? And one of the arguments used against playing with miniatures is that it turns the game into a bit of a chess game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I attack the roper. The problem here is that both of these arguments are absolutely valid, and that in many ways it comes down to a style choice of what do you prefer. I often consider this argument a bit of an irrelevance. For example, in a room of this size, I can get anywhere in this room and do any action, including knock everything over. The argument for miniatures seems to stem around what happens in larger rooms, such as here, where my hero is joined by an archer here, and they've decided to clear out these smaller baby drakes before dealing with the larger worms. So, what happens? The archer shoots one of the baby drakes, and then the warrior here goes charging in to kill one. Now, in many groups, there needs to be some kind of clarity over which monster was shot and which monster is being charged. And yes, that is kind of important in the sense of tracking their hit points, but there doesn't need to be an argument of, well, if the archer shoots this one, then the warrior then can't reach this one over here because it's too far away. These kind of things aren't that important. The point is that in here there are 3 monsters. They are gouging on food. Nom nom nom. And on the other side of the room are the parents of these little raptorlings, and they've clearly finished devouring their last meal. And here we see clear signs that these creatures are tended to by something else, a foreshadow of what's to come in the adventure. What matters here is that the players can either reach the babies or reach the parents. They can't do both. So my warrior charges in and is attacked by the little raptors, whilst my archer keeps mother at bay, who charges her down, and daddy just behind. That's the important action. What isn't important is how many squares I moved. So you might think I'm arguing against miniatures here. But how can I do that when it looks so beautiful? Luckily, there is a happy medium between the two, which is gridless play. So in this environment here, I have no clearly defined marked squares. So my warrior might decide to jump to the nearest rock. Well, that's her movement action. The archer is drunk and falls into the lava. But if she wasn't, she'd be stood on the wall here, firing arrows. And that's really what's important. The action's important. I don't need a grid to determine what happens. So when it comes to miniatures, I much prefer gridless play. But how do you determine if a corridor is too long to run down in a single turn? So let's take the argument to its extreme. Our 2 heroes have entered a long room. And at the far end of that room is a wizard. He's casting spells at them as they approach. Now, a lot of players who advocate for miniatures say that it's really important we understand how many turns it takes to get to the end of the room. But we don't need miniatures for that in and of itself. They become more important when this happens. Our run to the Queen is now protected by several ranks of kobolds. So our heroes are going to have to fight their way through all the time, taking magic missiles from the wizard at the end of the long room. So our heroes charge in, and what some people will do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, you can't take an action. Well, you can take the dash action and collide with them, but then you can't attack, or you're one shot because you can't reach it. Meanwhile, the archer starts shooting. I dislike this because that player has been negated due to some arbitrary thing that the GM just happened to put the kobolds 1 square away. And in actual fact, that was complete accident as I was laying this out. Why should the player behind this character have to wait an extra turn before they do anything? That's boring. Nobody wants to do that. Does it add anything to our story or our adventure because she stood there doing nothing? I would argue that it doesn't, and that it's far better to say, I engaged the first rank of kobolds. Blah! Blood, maim, gore, death, carnage. They emerge victorious. At this point, we have a much larger run to the second lot of kobolds. Now, I don't need to count squares to know that's going to take a couple of turns. So I just move the character to the middle. Maybe the archer moves up to there. I don't need to count the spaces. A rough approximation is fine. And then in the next turn, die, 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 die. After this combat, we're left with a curious position. This is about 1.5 times what I moved before. What should I do as a GM in this situation? Well, one of the other things role-playing games get terribly wrong is that the combats tend to be static, and the rules even encourage this, granting opportunity attacks if you move out of base-to-base contact. And really, the fight should have moved. What should really have happened is the fighter came charging into this rank of kobolds, and as she moved forward, wading through them, they were moving back with her. That's far more likely to have happened. In any case, even if the distance is 1.5 moves, I would do whatever is the most interesting option. Yes, you make it to the foot of the platform, and now you're faced with the choice of climbing up or, I don't know, singing Christmas carols. I've got a longbow. I can hit her from here. It's not like we consider movement in our role-playing encounters, so when we're outside of combat, we don't worry about how many squares we can move, and we do away with the issue of time as well. Players will quite often speak for longer than their 6-second turn, having entire conversations taking several minutes. And yet this is the part of the game we profess to love, where the role-playing happens. So why do we do it differently in combat? I walk into the bar and I order a drink. Hello, good sir. Can you give me a... Oh, time's up. I'll continue next turn. One of the problems often associated with miniatures-based play is that it tends to encourage this board game approach, this style of play that's very system simulationist. And I'm not a big fan of that. But we already know that when we're outside of combat, the role-playing's better. So why not take that same style of role-play and apply it to combat? So after killing our way into this crypt, we get to the flaming skeleton in the middle of this pool who's chucking balls of fire at us. Well, why not allow? I charge at the skeleton and grapple it, diving into the water. The problem a lot of GMs would have with this is that they'd start off by running through the grappling rules. Yada, yada, yada. Some systems, the grappling rules are often not very good, or in some other systems, they can be overpowered. Vampire the Masquerade, it often allows a low generation vampire to overpower a more powerful one and just stake them for an instant win. In D&D, the grappling rules typically favour very strong characters to accomplish the task quite easily. In any case, regardless of the system, what usually happens is you run through the grapple rules and that's it, you've got the thing restrained. This concept of doing a dive across and then pushing the skeleton in, it doesn't necessarily get processed correctly because it's not really covered in the rules and you're kind of restrained to the normal actions you're allowed to do. But why not allow it? It's brilliant. The thing's on fire, it's surrounded by water, dunk it in the water. This kind of looser approach where you're not necessarily making standard attacks and standard movements, where you allow the players to be much more creative and then just come up with a way of implementing that, is much more preferable to the strict simulationist approach because it allows for more imagination and better stories. It brings that role-playing into combat. And that's why I love playing without miniatures, but I also love playing with them. So for me, the gridless approach provides that happy medium between the two different styles of play.